Support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
It did not take long before the political battlements were unmistakably and distinctively drawn between North Carolina's newest governor and its General Assembly. And assuming now Nikki Haley's advent into a Trump cabinet role, how will presumed governor-in-waiting Henry McMaster preside over critical issues in South Carolina? Welcome again. Happy New Year. Thank you for supporting the longest running and the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy, seen every week across the Carolinas. On this edition, a gang of 4 insiders who arguably eat, breathe, and sleep community issues and public policy in their respective fields, and we are better for it. We will meet them, and we'll start this dialogue off in just a moment.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Joe Stewart of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, Mebane Rash from the North Carolina Center for Public Policy Research, Andy Brack of the Statehouse Report, and Ashley Landess from the South Carolina Policy Council.
Welcome to our program, and here I was worried that no one was going to get along. I love this. In the first part of the show, that's always, you can tell the energy. Welcome all. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to have you all back. Mebane, I'll start with you. So, Donald Trump, he is now inaugurated as President of the United States. Interesting choice of candidate. We can argue that both ways. Give us a sense of Donald Trump, the candidate, and the rhetoric as a candidate, and now Donald Trump as a practicing president. Are they two different people? Do you think there will be a change?
Well, I think the one thing we have all learned about Donald Trump is that he is completely unpredictable, and we don't know, but we will all see and watch. I think what's going to be really interesting to see is how his agenda matches the wishes of the people who voted for him. Mm-hmm. And we've got 24 counties out in western North Carolina that voted more than 70% for Trump, and it's going to be fun to watch them watch his presidency and the art of governing unfold.
I don't want to short circuit that, but Ashley, so Mebane just said something about to the people that voted him in office. Isn't that the whole point, that he's the anti-candidate? That he doesn't play to a side necessarily? I know he has some loyalists and favorites, but isn't that the whole point here, that this guy's going to reset the system to some degree?
Well, and that is certainly, it was that presence, that feeling that people voted for. The actual substance of a Trump presidency remains to be seen. But people voted against the system, whatever that looked like, whatever it felt like. They wanted someone to be a champion. And I think that's why you've seen so many politicians elected recently who really don't put a lot of specifics out, but they just have an air about them and a conversation that says, we're going to change things. Will they actually be changed? I don't know. That's up to the people more than the president.
So, Andy, Joe, do you think Trump's going to be a different president than he was a candidate?
Well, I think everybody walks into the White House and there's a little bit of on-the-job training that necessarily comes with those responsibilities. You're exposed to the kinds of information about what's actually going on in the world that the average person does not have access to. I think Trump becomes presidential as a result of some of the early experiences he will have. Probably most conspicuous will be the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice. That's a very specific Washington insider kinds of dynamic. And so we'll see Trump have to learn to play a little bit of the inside game to get his nominee to the Supreme Court confirmed.
I think that's fair.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see government by 140 characters because I don't think the Twitter fascination is going to go away, and I don't think you can govern in short ways like that. I think the governing are conversations, and from what I've heard, mostly Trump is one way, not two way. And so if he learns to listen and learns to think a little bit, and work with people, maybe. But
You know, this is just dropping a grenade into it, Andy, and anyone, please. But Andy, isn't it the point that representation of the people didn't seem to be working? Trump was able to short circuit connection right to the top of the House. Whether it's one way or two way, isn't this access even one way going to be meaningful enough to change kind of what we've been doing?
it will change what we've been doing, absolutely. But whether that's going to be long-term and systemic or a 2-year change that so many people get disappointed so quickly that they do something else. I mean, the Obama election was a change election. Mm-hmm. You know, the Bush election was a change election. The Trump election is a change election. How long is that going to last?
And it's got to
before they want to change him.
Right.
Change in the lived realities of people across the country, and that's what's going to be the measure of the success of his presidency. There's no escaping that.
Do you think? Go ahead.
And there's the dichotomy. People want change. They want someone who's going to shake the system up. However, if you think about it, we're voting more and more for what I call a celebrity politician, the personality and a good story. People feel that there's something different about these candidates, but in reality, there really hasn't been much different about these candidates.
And part of what we're going to see early on in the Trump administration is the beginning of the rise of the millennial generation, huge populational cohort, 87 million nationally. In North Carolina, this election was the last time baby boomers were the plurality of voters. Millennials will now become the candidates as well as the constituents, and their expectations about how information comes to them and how decisions are made very different than previous generations.
That generation wants substance, not flash. And we've had a lot of flash over the last 18 months. Now we'll see, is there going to be substance delivered?
But they want substance quickly.
That's right. I agree with you. That's exactly what it is. They do want substance in 140 characters.
And then if after 2 years there's no substance, more change. Right.
Okay, so in the lead up to the election, as the candidates ran, Trump made a big deal about trade, and he specifically put a target on China and talked about unfair trade with China. We will see how that unfolds. I have heard from not just CEOs, but those that make policy, those that lead, those that talk around policy, are I wouldn't say worried, but concerned, since the Carolinas are both net exporters of goods and services, that this could be a problem. Do you agree that it could be a problem?
Absolutely. Such a large portion of North Carolina's business community now has an international disposition. The nature of the changing global economy in North Carolina, significant portion of agriculture, which is our largest single element of our gross state's domestic product, is exported to foreign markets, Canada and Mexico. Charlotte is the largest concentration of German-owned corporations in North America. I mean, significantly more a part of the world than we have been historically. And so companies are far more interested in what the relations that we have with other countries in terms of trade than they've ever been.
But that will be felt differently across North Carolina. So that will be felt in the urban, bigger areas where you've got top employers that'll be impacted. In those 60 counties where public schools are the top employer, that won't matter as much. It's important to understand that differentiation.
What about the dramatic rise of aerospace and automotive industry in South Carolina? I mean, it's been an unbelievable success. That's got to have some risk to it.
It does have some risk. It's going to be, you know, I think a lot of people in rural areas like you're talking about will be happy for America to go after China because China hadn't been playing fair. But, you know, it's going to have an impact everywhere. And we've got to be very cautious and move slowly so that we don't interrupt the flow of trade through the Port of Charleston, which is a huge generator in our economy, so that we're welcoming still to the Boeings and to the BMWs and the Volvos and the Daimlers. Those are our core competencies right now.
I will throw this into the mix. Considering the degree to which politicians are really picking and choosing the winners and losers in the economy, there has never been more driving.
What do you mean by that, though?
Well, honestly, if you look at South Carolina right now, you see that a lot of the employers, the sectors, are either heavily subsidized by government, or they're part of government, or they're very dependent on government for what they do, healthcare industry, and that's growing massively. You've got a lot of interesting services cropping up as a result of Obamacare, but so much of it is being driven by politicians more and more, and that's what can't be sustained.
You know, and that's a whole other discussion. Are we talking about with Department of Commerce and what they've done incentive-wise to get these businesses
That's part
in? Because
of it.
that will sunset to some
bet.
degree.
But it should.
After 20 years or so.
Right.
I mean, you know, you got a humongous company moving in and not paying taxes for 20 years. That's a problem because that hurts particularly rural counties that don't have a tax base.
Right.
So there needs to be some of the inequalities need to be fixed.
I think that's right, and I would address it differently with tax cuts across the board so that companies don't have to go through a lobbyist, through legislative leaders, in order to deal with the nation's highest manufacturing property
And
tax.
I would say do it a different way by getting rid of $3.1 billion in special interest tax exemptions
I agree
so
with
that
that.
you can get some more sales tax money in there.
Have you two been married in a
No. No.
We've known each other a long time. South Carolina's a small state.
But a big part of this, despite, irregardless of the state, the paradigm politically was that an elected official wanted to cut the ribbon in front of a brand new factory or announce it. 30% of the world's jobs are now in the gig economy. People make their living doing this. So the whole paradigm of what it takes to be successful economically is changing. But we have generationally politicians whose expectations of the outcome of good public policies that bring jobs will have a certain political benefit to them, and that's changed.
Okay, well, let's talk about the chief recruiter in both states because that job has changed. Roy Cooper in North Carolina, and certainly Nikki Haley, as she, we assume, will advance to the United Nations, and that leaves Henry McMaster. So how does all of this change? In North Carolina, Joe, Mebane, how does this change now with Roy Cooper? If he can get past the judicial issues with the, and I'm talking about jurisprudence issues with the General Assembly, and will he be an economic development governor? Will he be able to flex his muscles? Can he do it? Can he think in those terms?
So I think we know exactly what he's going to do after yesterday. He's going to expand Medicaid. He wants to increase public education spending, and he wants to repeal HB2. Those are his priorities. And we know the Republican playbook as well. More tax reform, more regulatory reform, spending restraint, and they think that equals investment and job creation. So we know where both parties are. I think the more interesting question, I'd love to know what you think, is kind of where we are in the evolution of party politics in the state. Yeah, is it reactionary? Mm-hmm. Does Roy Cooper set out an agenda that gives voters something to buy into, that encourages them to want more taxes, more spending, a big government role? Is it revolutionary? You know, how are they positioning themselves for 2010? Yep. And are Republicans going to hold leadership for 2010 and 2020 and 2030? Or do Democrats find a way to edge back into that? Or is this just the evolution of party politics and kind of a single step in the march towards a competitive two-party state?
Yeah, no,
that's what we're going to see.
The dynamics in North Carolina, our fast-growing state, is principally driving an increased urbanization. We're now an urban state by the Census Bureau's designation, but the largest rural population of any urban state in America. But the growth has been principally around Charlotte, around Raleigh. The legislative races where Republican incumbents lost in this election because of House Bill 2 were in the suburbs around Charlotte and Raleigh. Other parts of the state, that as an issue did not have as significant an impact. But the challenge is the fastest growing designation of voter in North Carolina by registration is unaffiliated. And half of the state's population now non-native. They've come from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Their expectations on public policy issues is really based on a quality of life assumption they made in the decision to come to North Carolina. They don't have the kind of partisan determination that historically North Carolina voters have had. So it really will be incumbent on the governor and the legislature to be able to have actual deliverables that they can point to in terms of what they got accomplished
to win re-election. So what do you think Cooper can do about this?
My unfortunate analysis is I think they're going to continue to butt heads. It's just a very difficult partisan time in American history, and that's reflective now in North Carolina. I do think governors and legislators, irrespective of party, do have a tendency to butt heads. Even when they're of the same party, they have a tendency to butt heads. But I think there will be an opportunity for them to find some issues they can work on. But for now, I think it's just going to be a very difficult situation, both from the governor's standpoint and the legislator's standpoint.
And the only thing that might break how they butt heads is that if they make this state somewhere people don't want to move to and live and invest in, that's not good for either party. And so I do think you might see a shift in the tenor, or I hope you might see a shift in the tenor.
You mean the public debate between?
How they have these conversations about politics and policy.
I think that, first of all, it's kind of amusing to me that y'all have these discussions in North Carolina, because we've been doing that for years, and now people are coming to South Carolina because North Carolina is so crazy with their politics. So, you know, welcome to our reality from the last 30 years. But, you know, I think that what is really going to happen in the next 20 years in state politics in the South is you're going to see an erosion of loyalty to parties, and you're going to see more individual caucuses coming up over specific issues. Yeah. I want to get roads, I want to get education, I want to get ethics reform, and people from both parties are going to come together. And so I would think that if Cooper is smart, that he'll do the same thing that Henry McMaster would do if they want to get their agendas together, which is they'll pick together people from both parties to make sure that they can ram through what they want.
So does McMaster have, and I'll give you a chance on this, Ashley, does McMaster have enough not lame duck status and enough leverage as governor, as an appointed governor to some degree, or, I mean, you could argue that it's appointed governor, as an appointed governor to get done what he would like to get done, or is he going to be a gatekeeper?
Well, first of all, the South Carolina governor has absolutely no real power in the state.
You could argue that about North Carolina.
And there's no question the legislative leadership pretty much unilaterally controls the executive branch. Almost. It's come to that. I think what you'll see is almost zero party loyalty out there beyond kind of the Statehouse crowd. More and more people are becoming frustrated with the politicians. They're becoming frustrated even at areas, in areas they don't even understand fully that they're frustrated. We've been seeing it for a long time. People are tired of the status quo. You saw that in this last election. I don't think anyone looked at Donald Trump as a Republican in particular. So in South Carolina, the divide is very different. It's really not left-right. It's really the politicians inside the system who are governing and controlling pretty much everything, and more with more secrecy than ever. And then you have the rest of us. Coalitions coming together on the ground to fight corruption, you bet. That's the best story coming out of it. But I don't think you're going to see a set agenda by Henry McMaster right away.
So let's assume that's true, as you just described it. Can McMaster get done two big issues? Transportation, infrastructure, put those together, and education. Will that be done? And by the way, North Carolina is not immune from that. I mean, you could argue that both of those issues are top two. So
you know, I don't know that he wants to do either two of them. So I don't think that those are on.
So is he even going to be important in that?
Look,
I think that
he has no power.
Yeah,
he
has the bully pulpit power, but we're going to have to wait to see what his issues are. But the legislature does have the responsibility to look after those two issues, and I think that they're going to be feckless mostly and just kind of be twiddling their thumbs unless they can, you know, just stop the nonsense that goes on.
So if Roy Cooper has delineated, Mebane, as you said, Medicaid would like to accept those federal Medicaid dollars, repealing HB 2, and what was it?
Public education.
And then public education, which he clearly put a stake in the ground in this. And Joe, you'll have an opportunity here. Will he be able to extract himself from the back and forth, almost rhetoric to be able to govern and get that done? Or is this going to end up, are we going to be professional plaintiffs and just ending up going to jurisprudence to get everything done?
I think you will see a lot of this play out in the courts. I also think you will see it play out in the court of public opinion. I mean, voters have been clear in North Carolina that their priorities are jobs and the economy, and public education is third, but it's a distant third to those two. And so I think you will see both the Republicans and the Democrats, especially with the 2017 elections looming now in North Carolina, wanting to have policies that they can point to on those things.
Yeah, from the business community standpoint, public education is sort of a two-edged sword. One, they need an educational system that will provide for the workforce that's necessary, skills and abilities to do the jobs that are available, the 21st century kinds of jobs. The second is, as a recruitment tool to the state, businesses are very interested about the quality of public education for the families they're looking to bring to do these jobs in North Carolina. When a facility is relocated from one part of the country to North Carolina, it's those those conversations with the families that have to relocate, first question is, what's the quality of the public education system locally? That's what makes it possible for companies to get people to move to a new location. And so it's very important that we find some alignment. It is an element of our economic development strategy that we cannot neglect.
Go ahead.
No, you know, it's going to be interesting in South Carolina to figure out what happens. I see a packed agenda, but I see a lot of thumb twiddling coming up this year.
Andy, it's got to be infrastructure and it's got to be education.
It's got to
doesn't
be,
it?
but will they do anything? That's the question.
So I seem like I'm frustrated, and I'm not. But you know, I've heard this so much for so many years now. I wonder when we hit the tipping point in the Carolinas, and we actually start to not just lose business, but our quality of life really starts to hit the rocks because we're not making these investments.
And look, I would flip that. I would say this. The tipping point is there and it's been pushed. Most of the main issues you see in South Carolina Statehouse are ones they would prefer not to discuss. They don't want to talk about the corruption problem, but we and others are forcing them to. They're all interconnected. In our state, at least, whether or not we have a healthy economy is directly dependent upon whether we can stop the corruption.
See, I disagree. You know, certainly there's some corruption, but government is done in the sunshine. I mean, I think there are some things done in the background. The biggest problem in South Carolina is poverty. And when you go into those rural communities and people have no hope because there's not jobs there, I mean, I've gone all over the state. You know, you go down into Allendale County where 40% of the children live in poverty. 40% of the children in 2017 live in poverty. I mean, that's just not acceptable, and the legislature continues to ignore that. They don't reform education. They don't bring in businesses into those areas. They just don't prioritize for those areas. That's the problem.
Well, fair enough, but I just have to say this one thing, and I know you know this is true. You can't expect change to come when certain members of the General Assembly are directly profiting from leaving the system exactly the way it is.
I would love to go down that. I want to talk more about ethics, but we're going to run out of time. So in North Carolina, how do we make education really a top priority, and how do we find the funding for infrastructure, roads, bridges, so on and so forth, and expansion in these areas?
So education is going to be a top priority this year. I think you're going to see a number of different issues that we're going to talk. It's going to be a conversation about how much money we spend and what it's being spent on. And there's also going to be a conversation about how we distribute those funds to local communities.
Will the relationship between the General Assembly and the new superintendent of public instruction be a good one?
Okay, so this is what I say. In North Carolina, we got a governor, we got a governor's education cabinet, we got a legislature, we got Phil Berger, we got a state board of education, we got a chair of a state board of education, we got a department of public instruction, we got a superintendent of public instruction, we got 115 school districts, we got 100 county commissioners funding those school districts, and we got charter schools. Who is in charge, Chris?
We have education out the wazoo in North Carolina.
Answer that question.
That's my point as well. Really, same point. Who do you go to make accountable?
I think Cooper will want to
it.
follow in the tradition of strong education governors in North Carolina, and you'll see him try to do that.
And to Ashley's point, how are the legislators in North Carolina or in South Carolina going to be forced to do change? And it's people that are going to force that.
That's key.
It's the institutions that are there. I mean, I can write all the newspaper columns in the world, and it ain't going to guilt them to do anything. You can write the same thing.
You get to about the last 45 seconds, Joe. Just education and transportation. How do we do it?
You know, I mean, we have a $60 billion transportation backlog in North Carolina, maintenance and new projects. The Republican legislature and the former governor did a good job and they created a greater priority in terms of what projects got funded and a greater source of revenue committed to those sorts of projects. But we have a significant problem as a fast-growing state. If we don't keep up with the infrastructure needs, we will not be able to attract businesses to the state. So something's got to be done, and I think that will compel legislators to move forward.
Do you think they will feel that wind at their back? You know, sometimes I think the winds got lost. The WINs got lost in some of the public debate and the wrangling. The issues about the budget's not so bad, and transportation policy was changed. But anyway, we run out of time. Folks, thanks for being on the program. We probably should have done 2 half-hour shows on this, but we'll continue it again. Andy, good to have you here.
Thank
you. Mebane, welcome. Good to see you again. Ashley, glad to have you back.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Joe, I still like the bow tie politics. It's good. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions or comments, we hope you will take the time to not just watch the show, but make comments. CarolinaBusinessReview.org. It's a long title, but it's certainly worth it, and you can watch past shows as well. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Happy New Year, and thanks again for watching. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health. Bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.